How the hell could this happen to me? I'm Mr. Healthy. And what I discovered actually, it just absolutely blew my mind, shocked and infuriated me actually, because what we've been told to eat for decades is killing us. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. We're now approaching 50% in under 100 years. In 1930, the chronic disease rate was 7%. We're now over 60%. Never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so fast. And he was trying to bring attention to the fact that there was mounting evidence that it was sugar that was the source of why people were starting to get fatter with more heart disease and heart attacks. Who knew, right?
All right, welcome. I'm very excited. We have a wonderful guest. Mr. Daniel Trevor is here to discuss with us, I guess, some of the interesting stuff about heart disease and aging and so on and so forth. I guess, Daniel, maybe start again with your background, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. This is take two for us, as you can recall, because we ran into a couple of technical difficulties. But anyway, yes, about 4 years ago, I had a heart attack, and it was a complete and total shocker, right? Because I was a slim, symptom-free Mr. Healthy, or so I thought. And having studied technical data throughout my life, I decided to take a dive into the medical and nutrition science to find out, how the hell could this happen to me? I'm Mr. Healthy. And what I discovered actually, it just absolutely blew my mind, shocked and infuriated me actually, because what we've been told to eat for decades is killing us. And I didn't know about any of this stuff. And so I took a dive. I went to YouTube University and Google University and all the books and the people that I found and so forth. I immersed myself in studies. And then I started finding people like you and Dr. Ford Brewer, Ivor Cummins, Dr. Eric Berg, and other geniuses on the cutting edge of modern medical science. And I didn't know anything about how to watch out for all this stuff by myself, because it turns out, Doc, I had 4 comorbidities. What woke me up was the fact that I had this MI, the heart attack. And that's what caused me to take the dive to find out how could this happen to me. And it was a long road. But soon after, I decided to get a lot of testing done because that's what I was missing. I didn't know about all the proper testing that a lot of doctors don't dive into. They don't. That's why I reached out to one of your colleagues, Dr. Ford Brewer, who's this genius out of Johns Hopkins, he's taught thousands of doctors over 30 years. He's even got this book, Prevention Myths, Why Stress Tests Can't Predict Your Heart Attack and Which Tests Actually Do. So with that and hearing about a lot of information from others, I got a lot of tests done to find out where was I in all this? And because I knew I was going to have a bad report card, but I wanted to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so that way I could have a benchmark where, 6 months down the line, 3 months, whatever, I could retest and find out exactly where I was to keep track of if I'm making progress or not. And I got to tell you, your book here, this Carnivore code, oh my God, you're blowing my mind here, buddy. When I followed a similar path to you, I remember in the beginning, first of all, thank you for your service in the military and helping all our guys over in Afghanistan and all that you've done with your medical expertise and putting the back together again and all that you must have gone through. And then what really blew my mind was you were in charge of, what was it? Nuclear warheads on intercontinental ballistic missiles? What? Are you kidding me? You are in rarefied. Not many people can claim that on their resume. And you were so funny. You said, yeah, when I got out in the public sector, I found there wasn't a big demand for that. Oh my God. You have such a great sense of humor in that book. But then again, I was also reading how you first found keto. And that was me. I first found keto, low carb keto, and then soon went into Carnivore after I found Ken Berry and now Carnivore. And it was really good to get it defined insofar as how I always thought, and I think most people still do too, that when people hear carnivore, they think that you only eat meat. I said, wait, no, that's being labeled now the lion diet. And carnivore, according to you, you're the expert in this area and others, it's just eating animal products, whether it's eggs, beef, butter, cheese, and so on. Anyway, that's a little bit of my background and insofar as what got me here. The result of all this was a book that I wrote. It's called Unholy Trinity. Here we go. How carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip. How carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip. And I have to thank Ken a lot because when he invited me on his show, I got to be honest, I was a little scared because, wait, he has what size of an audience? I said, well, we can stop and correct things if I make a mistake, right? Oh, no, it's a live stream. I said, what? Holy shit. No. I said, what? And they said, what's wrong? I said, I wrote the book and I do know the data, but knowing the data and rolling it smoothly over my tongue in a professional fashion, it's a little different. I took the dive into just thought, threw caution to the wind. Let me just jump in and do it. And his interview is what really put the book on the map. Shot it to #1 on Amazon for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and longevity. So I was just thrilled about that. And I also I was talking about you I was on with Curry Mann recently, a few weeks ago. And you probably saw him over the weekend, right? Yeah. What a guy. Yeah. What a guy. He had quite a transformation. And I don't know if you want to hear about my 4 comorbidities now. Anyway, I'll let you ask the questions.
Yeah, just for the record, because you said you were taught the wrong thing, apparently. When you grew up, you're a little bit older than I am. You probably saw a significant shift in the population of health. I mean, you have to see. When I was a kid, there was rarely any of these children in my class. And I can imagine when you were there, it was probably pretty not unusual. What do you think caused you to, I don't know if you want to say fall for it, or did you not feel any different? Because like you said, you've always been health conscious. You're always exercising and trying to do the best thing. But what do you think led you to believe this sort of thing that maybe not be true?
I'm like a lot of other people, Doc. I was totally sold on the propaganda and the BS of, air quotes coming at you, heart healthy whole grains. In the morning, I'd have this granola that had to have at least 60 grams of carbohydrates in it, probably with some high fructose corn syrup. And oh my God, I didn't know that these grains turn into sugar when they go into your body. So besides trying to figure out what was the mechanisms behind how I got to this point where I had a heart attack, to look into all this, I also took a look at the whole situation, like you point out. And basically, the book is also, besides it being a how-to book of how I reversed 4 comorbidities, which I'll tell you about in a minute, it's also what you would call a situation and data analysis of this. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. We're now approaching 50% in under 100 years. In 1930, the chronic disease rate was 7%. We're now over 60%. Never before in human history has a population gotten so fat and so sick so fast. You got to say, what the hell is happening? And when you pull the strings on it, you find out that it's this unholy trinity, because we didn't have all this in the diet. Granted, sugar's been around a long time. It was invented in India. And it was even referenced as far back as the Atharva Veda, which was 900 to 1200 BC. So it's been around a while, but the rest of them, these poisonous seed oils they didn't even discover them until 1865. And they didn't come into the heavyweight into the human diet until about 1912, when these 2 guys from Europe came over. Was it James Gamble and William Procter and Gamble? And they came up with this thing called Crisco, which is just 50% trans fats. It's interesting that date coincident with that, because we didn't have heart disease back then. People in 1900, they died of tuberculosis, pneumonia, infectious diseases. The very first officially medically recorded heart attack wasn't until 1912. And that's when this Crisco started flying off the toilet. Now, I don't know if but I have a lot of charts and graphs in the book and that kind of thing to make it easier for the reader. And so I have this chart where it shows how from 1900 to 1955, it's going like the heart disease and heart attacks were going like this until 1955. That culminated in our President Eisenhower having a heart attack. And this joker came along, what's his name? Ancel Keys. And he had this theory called the diet heart hypothesis, that it was the meat and the cheese and the butter, and it was clogging up the arteries and everything. And it was like the analogy he gave that people bought into was like a shower drain where there's the soap and the grease and the gook and it all clogs up. And it's not that way at all because it's subendothelial. It's not in the lumen in the artery wall where the blood flows at all. It's a whole other bunny hole we can go down. But anyway, he had it all wrong. But he was very unethical in the reporting of his research, but very influential. And that's what turned everything around, because in about 10 years, Big Food started coming out with all this low-fat, non-fat food, but with high carbs and high sugars to make it more palatable, right? And that stuff started flying off the shelves, and that was the 70s. And that's where they coincident also with the introduction of the U.S. dietary guidelines, which as on the base, it says that you have to have 6 to 11 servings of like pasta and cereal and all these high carb things. And it should be reversed, as at the top of the pyramid, they have the meat, butter, and cheese and all that. So it was just backwards. But interestingly, at the same time, see, after President Eisenhower's MI, there was this doctor, Dr. Paul White, and he was appointed his personal physician. But unfortunately for the president, Dr. White was a good friend of Ancel Keys, right? And he got him involved, and they put him on a low-fat, quote, heart-friendly diet. And then he developed type 2 diabetes. He had a stroke. He had more heart attacks, and he ultimately died from intractable heart failure. But at the same period of time, there was this guy in England called Dr. John Yudkin, Yudkin, and he was trying to bring attention to the fact that there was mounting evidence that it was sugar that was the source of why people were starting to get fatter with more heart disease and heart attacks. Who knew, right? And he and his associates found that patients with plaque in their arteries consumed significantly more sugar than the control group. And in another study of mice and humans, they found that the excessive consumption of sugar might lead to a higher secretion of insulin, and this might contribute to plaque in the arteries as well as diabetes. It was like he was so far ahead of it. And then finally, in 1972, this guy, Dr. Yudkin, he wrote this book called Pure, White, and Deadly: The Problem of Sugar. In other words, to warn people that sugar can lead to obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and liver disease. So I tried in the first couple of chapters, I like to give the whole history of how we got here in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff. And the other thing is, going back to Eisenhower, most people don't realize he was a multi-pack a day smoker, which
Exactly.
probably might add something, or you don't know, it's kind of speculative, right? Yeah, it's been interesting to see that evolve over time. As we know, the sugar industry bought off Harvard to bury that sugar had some heart disease. And it's interesting that we see, it's interesting because we now live in a time where we've got everybody taking these Ozempic shots, these GLP-1s, which reduce blood glucose, and guess what? They show a cardiovascular benefit. But it's the same thing, and obviously you can get that naturally through diet if you eat the right foods. Interesting. So I guess, so you had a heart attack. How long ago was that heart attack?
It was about 4 years ago. And you're so right. But Doc, I got to correct you on something. Don't you know that obesity is an Ozempic deficiency? And heart disease is a statin deficiency? It's funny you bring up the smoking, because years later they found, after they discovered and invented electron microscopy, where they could snake up the tiny little cameras into the arteries, they discovered this thing called the Glycocalyx. And I have an image of this. And Glycocalyx is this fuzz-like lining of the artery walls. This is for your audience. I know you know what this is. And it acts as the first line of protection against what's called small, dense LDL particles from invading and getting stuck subendothelial to proteoglycans and other chemicals there, and build up plaque over time. They found that smoking destroys the glycocalyx, and it was an epidemic back then. Everybody smoked. The doctors smoked around their patients. You know what it was like. I'm sure you've seen images of those kind of things. So the glycocalyx, what happened was smoking did go down, but about 10 years later, they discovered that with all the introduction of the heavy carbs and sugar, they found that a bigger destroyer of the glycocalyx is from the carbohydrates from grains and sugars. And so we substitute one cause of the destruction of the glycocalyx, which is smoking, with another one, which is much worse. That's why, as Dr. Phil Ovadia, he and I were discussing this too on his podcast, that's why it continues to this day, because of the carbs and sugar, and the oils just exacerbate things. And of course, the oils, I'm not talking about olive oil, and there are a couple of good ones, but there's other ones that can be really dangerous. But anyway, it's funny you should bring all that up. The smoking was really the cause of it, because like you said, he was 2-3 packs a day.
Yeah, clearly. And it's interesting because this is an aside, because we successfully reduced the smoking rate significantly. And back in 1954, it was 45% of the population. Now it hovers around 13%. And that was through a massive government campaign to do. I think we should do the same thing for processed foods, not make it illegal, but let people know that these ultra processed foods are killing us. And the problem is the government's doing the exact opposite. They're out there saying, no, ultra processed foods are fine and we should eat them and there's nothing wrong. I mean, there's literally government funded studies that are claiming that, which is mind boggling why they would do that. I know why they do. There's a financial incentive to do so. So 4 years ago, you have a heart attack. You thought you were doing the right things. You have this heart attack. What did the physicians say? They probably didn't tell you to eat more meat, I'm sure. How did that go?
As Dr. Phil and I were talking about Dr. O, as I call him, I got the usual talk. You got to go low fat and all that. And what I found in my investigation, we've all been fooled for a long time. It reminds me of Mark Twain's wonderful quote. This guy was the king of common sense. He said something like, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. It's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. Because once they get that idea in their mind that it's the meat and the butter and the cheese and all the meat, the animal products is going to clog up your arteries, they get stuck with that, and they just can't think straight after that. And especially if it's coming from a guy who's wearing a white jacket, who has an MD after his name, knows all, sees all. And so it's just so wild that we come into that kind of thing and we can't question it, which reminds me of another quote of another guy you probably know of. His name was Richard Feynman. He won the Nobel Prize for quantum physics. And he had this amazing quote. He said, I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. Right? Sometimes we just don't know. And we have to say we don't know. But rather than, you can't question that because it's settled science, I said, get out of here.
Yeah, science is always been replaced with religion in many ways. We see that science is settled. Anybody who says the science is settled, that's a very unscientific statement, because we're always revising. As physicians, we used to promote smoking in the 40s and 50s as a healthy thing. And it's like, how many things did we get wrong before we see that? And it's, these people are so convinced they're right, and yet you see things are obviously, clearly running exactly counter to what they're saying, and they still don't look us in front of their eyes. There's a lot more nuance than most people today. What propelled you or compelled you to write a book about this? Why are you a guy, you're a health, successful guy, has a heart attack? What made you write a book now? What was the deal on that?
I was always highly literate. I studied technical data and I knew how to write and that kind of thing. And it was my first book that I ever wrote, but I thought I have to share this with other people because I would have so many WTF moments in my research. I go, are you kidding me? And so I wanted to share these moments that I had with a reader to say, look, you've been fooled. This is the true data. And I tell people, I tell the reader early in the book, I said, look, I know you might be thinking that without formal university degrees in medicine, organic chemistry, why the hell should I trust you? I say, look, don't. None of this is Daniel's opinion. I have 1,227 scientific references and citations in the book. And so, look, don't trust me. Trust the modern science. And I really got good at picking the right studies, RCTs, randomized controlled trials, and so on, and made sure I didn't have anything that had funding from big food, big pharma, and big medicine, and that kind of thing. And I just wanted to really make sure that, look, I was able to reverse 4 comorbidities, which I'll tell you in a second, and follow this data. You can fix yourself too, like I did. And so I had to share this because my results were just remarkable insofar as my gains and everything. What turns out was I was a raging type 2 diabetic, and I didn't know it because there's all these diseases are silent diseases. You don't have any symptoms till you're way down the line and it's a long road back, or it's just too late. How about this stat? Over 50% of the people who have a deadly first heart attack, the very first symptom of heart disease is their own death. It's what? So there are no symptoms. There's no signs. There's no clouds before the storm or anything like that. So you got my biggest message is basically find out what's going on inside you with the proper testing and then fix yourself, because that's what I did. That's why I reached out to Dr. Ford Brewer to write, because he was brilliant at all the testing and all that information. I said, would you write a chapter that delineates what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can buy inexpensively online without needing a doctor's prescription? Because sometimes you'll go to your doctor and say, hey, doc, I want this test that I heard about from Dr. ShawnBaker, and I want this one over here. And he'll go, oh, you don't need that. You don't need that. You're fine. And the only reason he's saying it is because he doesn't know what it is and wouldn't know how to analyze it anyway. So that way you can go, okay, so I'm ordering this test, and I have all that in the book. He titled his chapter, Don't Guess, Test. And because you got to get out of mystery, because you probably know about this study from 2019 out of Johns Hopkins, and they did this big study, and they found that 74% of doctors, and we're talking general practitioners, family physicians, internists, and cardiologists, 74% do not know how to properly diagnose or test for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. And are you kidding me? Because that's the source, the gateway disease to all these other things. Heart attacks, strokes, dementia, cancers, PCOS. I have a whole chapter on that. On. And the reason, even the American Diabetes Association will tell you that, hey, if you just check, there's 2 that the doctors normally check. They'll check A1C and fasting blood glucose. And if you only check those 2, you're going to miss 70 to 80% of the patients that have type 2 diabetes, because a lot of times you can get normal readings on your blood tests and they don't do this other test. And I cover it in chapter 7. It's I call that section the most important health test you've never had, because this one tells you where you are on the diabetic spectrum. Are you just entering? Are you in prediabetes mode, or where are you? And it's the OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. And that will tell you exactly where you are. That was me. I had normal readings on my fasting blood glucose and my A1C. But when I got that OGTT with insulin, oh my God, I was at 200 like on the first hour or so. So I had the type 2 diabetes, which led to the heart attack and the heart disease, which I didn't know. And then I also had an NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which was strange because I don't drink, no drugs. I'm already silly enough, as my daughters would surely attest. And then I also had osteoporosis. And with the big food push, they're finding more and more. I have a chapter on that too, chapter 13, which you might find interesting too, on osteopenia, osteoporosis. And I start off with this one study where they're finding these in lower and lower ages. And there's this one study that we're finding between the ages of 35 and 50, these situations. And that's why I say, look, you got to get a DEXA scan, a DEXA, DEXA scan. Of course, you know what that is. And because And if your doctor says, oh, you're too young for it, show him this study. Right? Oh my God. So anyway, yeah, it's the result of all the push from the big food and that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the comorbidities, you said you had diabetes, obviously you had heart disease. What were the other things that you said you reversed all of them?
The type 2 diabetes was the source root cause of my cardiovascular disease and also the cause of my non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as well as the osteoporosis. And NAFLD was because, see, I didn't know about this whole high fructose corn syrup, that no cells in the body can metabolize it. It all goes to the liver and stores up there. And I'm looking at my pantry. I'm thinking it's everywhere in my pantry. So I didn't know a lot. I was ignorant about a lot of things, just like most people. I think what saved me from having the heart attack instead of my 40s, because I have heart disease and strokes in my family big time. So I probably should have had it when I was 39 or something. But I pushed it off probably because I made it to the gym. I kept making it to the gym regularly. And there's this thing as muscle glucose uptake, which is a process where when you do physical exercise, it draws the glucose out of the blood, which is where it's dangerous, and into your muscles where it can be used for energy. So I had that going for a long time because it's the faulty glucose metabolism is the source of the arterial damage and all of that. I cover that early in the book. In fact, page 2 of chapter 1, I think I go into the two most fundamental players of the processing of the food you put in your mouth, and that's glucose and insulin. Because as you know, you eat something, if it's the wrong food or whatever, you're eating too frequently, the pancreas senses it. It secretes some insulin to bring it down or keep it in the right range. And it's a natural process that goes on. But if you have that elevated day after day, week after week, month after month, you develop what's called hyperinsulinemia. Hyper, too much, insulin. Emia means in the blood. And then you develop what's called insulin resistance because the cells come to reject or resist the overload of the insulin. And that leads to all the inflammation, your type 2 diabetic physiology, and then all these other diseases that we've known about for a long time. I'm even on the cover of Time magazine, like in 2004, 20 years ago, they had a cover story. It was The Secret Killer. How inflammation causes heart attacks, strokes, Alzheimer's, cancer, many other diseases. Whoa. So we have known it for a long time, and it's all because of the inflammation. So yeah, those are the 4 comorbidities. I had the CVD, cardiovascular disease, the type 2 diabetes, which I didn't know, even though I was on the lean side. See, I was like Dr. Peter Attia. He had developed his type 2 diabetes because he drank so much Gatorade, and he was an amazing athlete, triathlons, and all that kind of thing. Kind of like you. You've been such an amazing athlete for so many years. And he and I were on the lean side, and we both there's about 1% of the population that can be slim and still develop this diabetic physiology. The first sign of having diabetes, of course, is being overweight. And you have a belly, that kind of thing. Anyway, that's the long answer to your short question. Those were my 4.
So when you had your heart attack, how was it treated? Did you get a revascularization or a stent push, or how did they treat that?
I got a PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention, which was a stent. And so I did that, and I didn't know any of this stuff at the time, but I have a whole where I take a deep dive into cardiovascular diseases, chapter 17, 18, 19, and 20. I have all about the statins. I got anybody that's got heart disease or they have it in their family and you need to take heed ahead of time. You got to read those chapters because, there were the 3 large studies. You may have heard of them. And they really rocked the cardiology world because there were such failures. And the first one was the ischemia trial, which is this big government-funded $100 million trial, almost 5,200 patients. They divided them into 2 groups. One group got invasive procedures, CABG, CABG, that stands for coronary artery bypass graft. And I know you know all this. I'm saying this for your audience, right? And they got PCIs, the stents. And the other group, they sent in the direction of lifestyle changes. Get back to the gym, drop 30 pounds, stop eating the junk, maybe along with some blood pressure medications, that kind of thing. So they followed them closely for 4 years. And they found that it was just what they wanted to prove, that these invasive procedures were the shit, right? Because there's so much of an enormous amount of money in them. And they just said, look, these failed to show that these invasive procedures prevented heart attacks. They just don't do it. And then there was the Orbita trial, same thing. The Courage trial, same thing. And that was the big headline that rocked the medical community, especially the cardiology world. And then I ask in the book, I say, listen, now that we discovered this, do you think these would come to a halt or at least slow down? The chart looks like this. There's so much money made in these procedures because there's no way that the board of directors or the CEO of the cardiology clinic is going to see all that go away, because institutions and careers would also disappear, because there goes the beach house and the kids in Ivy League and the Mercedes goes to a Chevy, and everything would change in so many. Look, and I don't mean to sound like I'm bad mouthing it, but here's the science. And I don't mean to bad mouth, because a lot of these people, they're saving our lives all day long, like you used to do. We go in there, they have to set the bone and suture up the wounds and remove bullets and steering wheels from our chests. And it's just, I love all of them. Even my older daughter, Chloe, got her degree in medicine, now works in the ER. So I talk to her about all this stuff all the time. And she just turned 30. And my younger daughter, Camille, she's about to turn 27. So I'm a dad too. Forgot to add that in my little bio up front. But anyway, so these stents and bypass surgery, 85% of the time when they're done for prevention. And we've proven with these 3 major studies that they don't work for prevention. They're only done 15% of the time for emergency situations, like the person's having a heart attack, something's going on in the hospital, that kind of thing. And it's just crazy. Anyway, I'm sure you know a lot of this stuff, but I
remember when the data came out showing the stents weren't effective for things of that nature, which is interesting. And that they still do them by the dreams of billions of dollars a year and procedure costs and profit and so on and so forth. And, even in my specialty, orthopedics, a lot of the arthroscopic arthroscopy were pointless, and yet we still do them. But it's in there. I'm not saying all of the law, but the indications that many people do them for don't really work much. So at what point you had your heart attack, doctor said low fat. What was your cholesterol? What did your labs look like prior to your heart attack? Were you always keeping your cholesterol low, or was it running really high, or did you even know?
I didn't really pay attention, so I can't really give you a really good before shot. Just like I can't give a really good before photos of my body, because after I did this transformation, I wasn't even working towards it, but my abs started getting cut and chiseled. I'm going, what is this? And then I find out that, and I'm not talking about professional bodybuilder type abs. I'm talking about the abdominal muscles that exist on any human they're just covered up with adipose tissue, fatty tissue. And if you dissolve that, there they are. And I have one of the pictures I have in the book is I have some hunter-gatherers, and there's this picture of these 3 guys. They're Aborigines from, I think the photo's from 1930 something. And the one guy in the middle, you could tell he's older because his beard and his hair has got grays and whites and everything. But he's like chiseled and fit and everything. I'm thinking, man, there might be hope for an old guy like me, right? And turns out that I did get some photos done to show that off. And this is not a brag fest, but I just wanted to let people know that, look, if I can do this at my age, because I'm 75, and I seem to be getting younger looking as I stay on this more ancestral diet. And so anyway, there's hope for all of us. Let me just put it that way.
Yeah, fair enough. And it's interesting to see when you look back in the historically, where, as you mentioned, a lot of people die with infectious diseases. Now it's chronic disease. Chronic disease affected in this country. And just for people, what age are you? Because you've got abs. What age are you now?
I'm 75. I sent you in my book. I have chapter 14, because I'm always being asked, what is it that you do exactly every day? And so I give this whole thing about what I do. And I also include these photos. And I asked the reader to be kind to me because I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I had to depend on the photographer to say, okay, look to your left, look down, raise your arm this way. And I didn't know what the hell I was doing because they're basically like what you would call model fitness type photos. But anyway, so I wanted to give encouragement to people that, look, if I could do this at my age, you can too. Don't listen to your doctor. You have to find out. That's why I think the book is doing so well, because I write it like I speak. I'm not a great writer or anything. It's my first book. And I realized early on that I write how I speak, because I want to talk to the person, the reader. Hey, look, this is what I went through, and I had the same addictions as you. And what I did was I made a record. I can't live without this and this. These are my 5 or 6 things that I just can't. I'm just out of control. You have to, as soon as possible, find delicious substitutes that are healthy and switch them out, because you got to get rid of the grains, or at least cut back gradually. You can't do everything at once because it's just way too hard. And little by little, you get it out. I didn't know that wheat raises your blood sugar higher than table sugar, or wheat raises it higher than a Snickers bar. I didn't know most people don't know any of this information. So I got to provide all those, like I said, WTF moments in the book. And I think people are resonating with it. And I'm thrilled by that, because that's the biggest thrill for me, because you don't get rich writing health books, but I have become very wealthy because now that it's an international bestseller, I'm hearing from people all over the world saying, Daniel, this is amazing. Where's this data been? It's like Mark Twain said, it's easier to fool people than to convince them they have been fooled. So we've all been fooled, and that's what happened to me.
Yeah, the interesting thing is it's easy to fool people about a lot of things, particularly things they can't evaluate objectively by themselves. The nice thing about health is you can very quickly feel much better and know that things are going the way you weren't supposed to. They weren't supposed to go, I suppose. What do you do? What are you doing now? I mean, you said you've changed your diet. Maybe your lifestyle the same. What do you do today to sort of keep healthy?
Well, the main 3 things that I've labeled in the book, the Trinity of Triumph, is going low carb, keto, ketovore, or carnivore. And sometimes you have to do it in stages. That's how I came to it. To arrive here, I first started with keto, and how I got there. And then I found out about intermittent fasting and all the benefits of that. I have, chapter 8 is all about that and the benefits and the science behind it and autophagy and why it's very ancestral too, because let's face it, we were lucky to eat once a day, right? So we would have these cellular troops, so to speak, to come to our rescue and make sure that we're still able to hunt and so on to continue. Because when we were hunting, I'm sure we were hungry, sometimes maybe even starving, right? So we were in a fasted state, not infrequently. Let's put it that way. And then I discovered fasted exercise. And then I discovered that the Hollywood trainers would put their actors and so forth. That's how they would get them fit and chiseled. What's his name? The Hugh Jackman, the Wolverine. He got so ripped because he did the intermittent fasting with the exercise during a fasted state. In fact, I even have a couple studies in the book too. One where one group did fed exercise. In other words, they ate breakfast, and the other group did fasted exercise. And in 1 month, the group that did fasted exercise lost 300% more fat mass than the other guys that ate. It really does work. And I do that too. Towards the end of I try to do 18 hours a day, 16 to 18 hours a day. And towards the end of my fast, I go to the gym. And that's, I think, what really carved up my stomach in a way that I was never expecting. And again, it's not like I don't look like a bodybuilder. I don't look like you or anything, but it just, for my age, it's not bad. But anyway, there you go. Those are the 3 main things that I do. And I'm at Carnivore now because, again, I started a keto And then I was continued to eat maybe some asparagus. That's very low lectins, low carb, that kind of thing. And then I eliminated that and I got closer and closer to Ketovore, which I discovered with Ken Berry. And then now I just have, once in a while, I'll have as a dessert a couple of teaspoons of berries. And I was just telling Kerry Mann on his podcast a couple of weeks ago, I said, look, if you and I were out hunting 12,000 years ago, and we came across some berries that just came back into season, we go, holy shit, look, let's tell Uncle Frogmagog, and he would tell the tribe, and we'd all go eat some berries because they're only around for a short period of time. Come on, we weren't thinking, oh, we're on the carnivore diet. We're not allowed to eat that. Come on, we ate what we could when it was available, and it was mostly animals nose to tail, right? We could catch, kill, and eat. But anyway, we had a good laugh about that too, because we have to use our common sense. What we came across that we could eat that was digestible and so forth. And it was yummy because the berries are certainly yummy, right? So that's some of the things that I do. But I'm with you now. I'm just animal products.
What made you decide to make that shift?
I kept noticing how I felt. I would find you and your amazing information, and Dr. Ken and his stuff, and Dr. Philip Ovadia, and I kept going down that road. And I'm thinking, let me get rid of these asparagus because I don't really need them, and I just would eat more meat. Kerry Mann has this. What does he call it? The carnivore bowl or something, where it's ground beef with half a dozen eggs and bacon. Or, you know what I did? I found, instead of going to the trouble of making the bacon, I was in Costco not long ago, and I found these things called chomps, and they're these grass-fed, grass-finished beef sticks. I'm looking at them going, I don't snack. I have 2 meals a day. I don't snack. Well, how would I use this? And now what I'm doing is I'm chopping them up into like 1/4-inch pieces and putting them in with my eggs along with the cheese and the butter. And it's amazing. That way I don't have to go to the trouble of making the bacon and all that kind of thing. And it's fantastic. So that's another new thing that I just discovered. And I'm open to any other suggestions. That's why I'm always tuned in to all you guys. Kind of, sort of. I'm trying to get the book out there because not because it makes a lot of money, but because people are benefiting from it so much. It's the same reason why you're doing what you're doing with Revero and your book and so forth, and the clients that you have. People need to be woken up to how we have been fooled, and we've been given false data and fake science, and all the doctors need my book and your book more than the public. But it seems like what's going to happen is the change is going to come from the grassroots, from us victims of the false data and fake science that's been foisted upon us for too many decades, and the doctors too, because they don't. Now, I haven't done any surveys of doctors, but I have a feeling, and you would know this better than me, I have a feeling that some of them have the mentality that if they didn't teach it to me in medical school, it must not be that important. I don't need to know about nutrition and all this stuff, right? And then I think to myself, if you take your dog Poochie to the veterinarian, one of the first questions he's asking you is, so what are you feeding Poochie? When's the last time you heard any doctor say, so what are you eating these days? Are you getting to the gym? Are you walking? Something like that. So it's just not something, and I understand they don't have time for that. And maybe they don't have the time to be the doctors that they want to be, because the average visit with a patient is 7 minutes and they're in and out. They're in this whole efficiency model, as they call it, of the confines of the, what do they call it, medical standard of care. And you can't go beyond these certain things. You learned that. You told about that in your intro, in your bio, how you were trying to tell people about the keto and low carb and all that. And they came down on you. So you know what I'm talking about, brother.
Yeah, it's unfortunately the incentives for healthcare are not aligned necessarily with patient health. It's more about profit than anything else, unfortunately. So, what would you say is you mentioned the unholy trinity, and so it's basically what grain, sugar, and oil, right? Basically, is that the
carbs? Well, when I say the carbs, I'm talking about the refined and ultra processed grains, which they turn into these powders, which they then turn into bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, tortillas, and on. And then you have your candy cake, ice cream, soda, fruit juice, pastries, and on that way. And then these oils, my God, they weren't even in the human diet until a little over 100 years ago, like we were covered briefly earlier. And who wrote a brilliant book about it was Dr. Chris Kenobi. You probably know him. Yeah, he's taken the deep dive in that. And he wrote me a wonderful endorsement for the book along with Nina Teicholz. She was the first about, what was her book, 2014 or something? And she exposed all this nonsense about, and her book was called The Big Fat Surprise, Why Butter, Meat, and Cheese Belong in a Healthy Diet. And her expose of how they suppress this information is just really alarming. And I got a great endorsement from her, too. And I was really lucky to get these wonderful people. I even got Dr. Lou Ignarro, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery of nitric oxide. I was beyond flattered by all of that. Believe me, these people, I was starstruck with all of them, right? I'm starstruck with you and what you've accomplished and your background in the military and medical science and what you've done in Afghanistan and other places. And then you're also we're in charge of the nuclear missiles. What? Big hugs to the big guy.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Dad. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, man.
Just,
yeah.
One of those songs where just do what you do, and that happened. My life has taken some very unusual paths, to say.
Very unusual.
It's fun to do that. You talk about one of the things I always tell people is if you're going to get a lab test or any kind of test, is it going to impactfully change anything? Because a lot of people get tests. I'm just giving a bunch of tests, and I love to get the answers. I tend to be very selective more what I recommend to people, and many times, like, why do you need to test anything in some cases? But like I said, if somebody has a limited budget, because you can rack up thousands of dollars in lab expenses if you were trying to test everything, what would you say your top few things would be as something to consider?
You can get this OGTT with insulin for, I think, maybe $50. I have all the data in the book. I tell you where you can go. There's a place called requestatest.com. And you can even choose your locations because it's either LabCorp or Quest. There are thousands of locations. And you pick the one that's nearest you. Maybe this one's a little $20 cheaper than the other one. And I think the OGTT with insulin is about $50 or $60 these days. And you got to get these things. And another one that I would really took me down the path with my non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, there's this liver enzyme that most doctors don't check. They'll check a CBC and a metabolic panel and a lipid panel, but they leave out this one test called the GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. And if they test anything, they'll check ALP, AST, ALT. And the reason why the GGT was elevated, and it turns out that I had that, and I found this guy online, one of your colleagues, Ivor Cummins, several years ago, and he had what I had, this elevated GGT. So I took the dive into that. What is that? And the reason why GGT is so important, and it seems like the medical field is just oblivious to it, it's like this. Life insurance companies, they need to know who to reject and who to accept. They're not so interested in medical science. This is bottom line to them because, they're the most successful companies on the planet that have been around since, the 1600s and stuff. And these life insurance actuaries are really good at calculations. And their number one predictor of all-cause mortality is having elevated GGT, gamma glutamyl transferase. It's like, why aren't they aware of this? LDL and total cholesterol, they don't even make it onto their mortality predictor lists. And I have all this in the book, how I discovered all this, and you got to get the GGT test. And I think last time I looked, that was, I don't know, $25 or something, which means the hospital or the doctor probably pays $5, right? So it's not a lot of money. You go online, you pick out the test you want, you go online, you go to either there or there's another one called lifeextension.com. And they have all these labs. You pick the one you want. You whip out your credit card. You pay. They send you an email with a requisition form that you print out. You take to your local doctor. Your local lab, which is either a LabCorp or a Quest. And they draw it. And then you get your results in a few days. Easy peasy. And so that way you're out of mystery. You won't be blindsided like Daniel Trevor was with his myocardial infarction, the heart attack that I had, to then cause me to, maybe it was meant to be that I would have that, then take the deep dive and write the book and then share it with others to warn others that what we've been told to eat and all the science, the BS stuff that we've been fed for so long is killing us. And this is how to avoid it or reverse it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting to see that. Amazingly, we've already gone through an hour. It seems like we just got started. So, Daniel, tell us if you got anything. If you got anything else you want to share in the next minute or two, and then where to find you, where to find your book. Go ahead.
Yeah, you can go to danieltrevor.com, and I have a few of those photos where you can see my new physique, my transformation, and believe me, it was a transformation. There, I have a 7-minute video that tells my story and what happened and some of the alarming stats that you've heard in this little bit with you. And then underneath the video, I have all these amazing endorsements from everybody from Mark Hyman to Dr. Eric Berg to Nina Teicholz, Dr. Phil Ovadia, the whole gang, all your colleagues, people that you know and love. And then I offer where they can get a free preview of the book, which is the first 48 pages. And that way they can just, all they need to do is read the introduction and you'll know right away if it's for you or not. Because I want a book, you really got to grab them in the beginning. But I have the first 48 pages. They can sign up, get on the mailing list. Once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'll send out a newsletter or an excerpt from the book. That kind of thing, and let them know what's going on, and maybe with a video like yours, like I just posted or I just sent out the interview that I did with Kerry Mann, and that kind of thing. So if you could send me your thumbnail for this, what you're going to do, and I can use that to promote your channel and everything else like that. But anyway, danieltrevor.com. Get on the mailing list, and yeah, like that.
Daniel, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we got through this without any technical glitches. You continue doing what you're doing. I'm sure you'll inspire quite a lot of people, and particularly children. It doesn't matter what age you are, too. You can get healthier and get better, and there's no reason not to.
Look, I'm just trying to catch up to you, brother. You are a miraculous example of what can be done. So thank you for all of your research and sharing what you've done for the rest of us and pointing us in the right direction.
Yeah, I got some interesting stuff coming down the bike. I'll be talking about soon. So anyway, Daniel, take care. Have a great one. Appreciate it, man.